Hi, I'm Dr. Carrie Freeman, an associate professor of communication at Georgia State University, and one of the co-authors of animalsandmedia.org style guidelines for media professionals and for the general public related to being inclusive and animal friendly in our media representation. So I'm just recording this video to show you a little bit about our guidelines and to tell you more about the journalism guidelines and the entertainment guidelines in particular. I think this video is useful for training. It could be for future media students at universities or in high schools, or those of you who are in a training class while you're working on the job. So let me share my screen and I'll show you the PowerPoint that I put together. You could see me quite a while ago, much shorter hair at a farm sanctuary. And then also the co-author Deborah Merskin, who works at University of Oregon, and she was my advisor when I got my PhD there. So we both are media professors. And this is the homepage originally of the website. And it's for fair, respectful, and inclusive reporting and cultural storytelling about non-human animals and issues. And you could see all the tabs across the top for journalists, advertisers, PR people, entertainment media, and the general public. So why is this important at all? Because it's not like animals, other animals are watching the media. They're not. But given the scope of the animal oppression and the environmental crisis we're in, obviously climate change, but also a mass extinction, fellow sentient beings warrant not only increased attention in media and pop culture, but coverage that encourages society to transform our relationships with all animals in ways that foster respect, justice, care, and ecological responsibility. The lives and habitats of the world's animals are largely dependent on the cultural values and worldviews promoted in media, such as encouraging humans to identify as animals ourselves. And so that's sometimes why you'll notice I'll use the term human or non-human animals, just to kind of remind us of our place in the world. And our tagline, a style guide for giving voice to the voiceless, comes from the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. And we don't mean to imply that other animals don't have a voice or agency. It's just that we don't often include or hear their voices. And so human media spokespeople need to amplify the voices or speak on behalf of other animals to human society. Also on the website, just want to let you know there are categories of experts in case you wanted to, if you're a documentarian or a journalist and you wanted to include somebody in your story who could actually speak on a particular animal issue or on the non-human's behalf in a respectful way, we have a resource of people, most of them have PhDs, to serve as those experts. So let's get started. The bulk of this video is going to be about me sharing the journalism guidelines. So one thing this video doesn't cover is the PR and advertising guidelines. So it sticks with journalism and then it ends with a little bit about in the entertainment media industry. So one of the subcategories under guidelines for journalists is utilizing non-human animals as everyday topics and sources. So we're just saying, hey, you should include the perspective and interests of non-human animals within any story where they're involved or where they're affected. So that's like across all the news beats. But I think it's also good to create an animal and eco protection news beat, like to have a tab across the top where that is a category. And you've got expert journalists who are making sure that we are talking not just about our own species, but about our species relationship with the millions of other species on the planet that we are affecting. And some stories will document abuse, of course, and conflict, and that's kind of natural in news, but it would also be good if we modeled some positive bonds between different species, mutually beneficial interspecies relationships. So here I have a picture of Dr. Tara Hadley, who is a veterinarian, and she's with an Atlanta-based wildlife rescue organization. I'm housed in Atlanta, and so I've been to this Aware Wildlife place a lot. So showing humans actually caring for other animals or other species caring for us is something that we should also incorporate. Staying on this same topic, we also asked journalists to investigate animal exploitation and harm. And of course, journalism likes to cover things that are criminal, breaking the law because that is newsworthy. Okay. So trade in endangered species or dog fighting or something like that. Okay. But I think that it's warranted because there's enough controversy over the ways we legally use and harm animals that the legal trade in wildlife, is particularly because of the pandemic, should be interrogated, as well as farming that we do of them, experimentation on them, hunting of them, using them for entertainment. Like all these things can be interrogated. So, and also for more well-rounded coverage, let's just not talk about question whether we're treating these animals in industry well enough, but let's also bring in the question or arrange the discourse around the topic of whether we are entitled to use other animals at all. And so not just like how to make their situation a little bit better in captivity, but should we be keeping them in captivity at all? This fulfills journalism's mandate to be a public forum for debate, and it holds the powerful accountable by questioning the status quo. I'm going to have some other images like I have here from Joanne MacArthur because she shares a lot of her images. She's a photojournalist from Canada, and she has a website called We Animals and a book called We Animals, and she has an archive. So here is an image. I think he is a fox and a fur farm in Quebec. Another thing journalists could do is avoid humanist bias. So that kind of is the status quo bias that goes unremarked for the most part. It's not really even recognized as a news bias, but represent non-human animals as sentient individuals in their own right, rather than always talking about them in terms of like how we relate to them or human-centered terms. Recognize that all animals share an interest in habitat and shelter, territory, food, water, safety, family. Didn't mean to go back. Freedom from pain, injury, and distress. And they want to express normal relationships and maintain relationships with whomever they want to, whatever companionship they want. So a lot of this is really just the kind of the very basic core things we would also ask in terms of human rights, but what we don't need to worry about with other animals is kind of the enfranchising them into the civil rights aspect of the human world. But at a very base level, they're individuals who really would like to be left alone and given space and freedom. They note that they exercise agency. They're not just all instinct. Similar to us, we have some instinct and we have some kind of individual free will in our decision making. A lot of other animals follow the same. So let's avoid stereotyping them by defining them primarily as a pest or a threat or game for hunting, tools for human food or entertainment or something like that. Because, for example, this little mouse here, she exists for her own reasons, not just to bother us or be used for experimentation or fur or something like that. You can talk about those things, but you also should recognize there's more to the existence of all other species than just what we think of them or how we use them. Again, with avoiding humanist bias, dedicate space to exploring the complex interactions between humans and the natural world while questioning long-standing cultural prejudices against certain species. So you see species that we tend to dominate and in some cases destroy, like we have snakes, we have sea animals, we have cows, cattle, wolves, coyotes. So, and there's just different preferences that we have, like we like dogs, but we don't like wolves, or dolphins and whales are great, but fish we don't care about. So let's just not, we can recognize these cultural traditions and that we might be scared of certain animals or that our religious texts talk about snakes in a certain negative way, but that doesn't mean that that's the main way we should continue talking about them just because we've started typing them and we may not really fully understand them. One thing that's pretty useful is we have a section on terminology to reduce bias and inaccuracy in language. So there's a section here that says, and that instead of these terms, use these terms. Instead of these terms, use these terms. So my dog is getting involved in and protecting my household from my neighbors or something, and which is great for us as a lead into pets. Pets is an okay word, but a lot of us are saying companion animals or non-human family members or something like that, rather than being a little more trivializing them with the notion of pets. We also, one of the big things is avoiding terms like it or saying that when you could say who. Animals have a sex of male or female. So just like with humans, if you don't know it, you could use the term they and be gender neutral, but you don't use the term it, which is for an inanimate object. We see that a lot. I see it a lot in my news studies. Even when the journalist knows the gender of the animal, they'll often, like a dairy cow who's obviously female, they'll still say it a lot of the times. No, she. Passive terms that conceal human control we use all the time: dairy cows, farmed animals, beef, cattle, lab rats, whatever. What you could also do is say, let's turn that first word, let's make it more of a verb. So we say the animals who are farmed, individuals raised and killed for food, cows used for dairy, cows and bulls used for beef or flesh, rats used as research subjects, elephants kept in circuses. That way they're not defined as if their only purpose in life is to be a circus animal or a lab rat. They are a rat who we are choosing to use. So let's insert ourselves in there rather than make them it seem like this is their destiny. And then there's just industry terms that are used a lot, or objectifying terms. So, if they are sometimes used, I think they should be countered also with more kind of neutral terms that are more direct. Like instead of calling somebody livestock, which is obviously pretty objectifying, refer to them as cows, sheep, pigs, donkeys. Don't just say pork, say pigs or hogs. Poultry are chickens, turkeys, geese, ducks. Veal are calves. Game, which is pretty kind of a rude term, deer, rabbits, foxes, ducks, or whichever animals are hunted in a particular society. And seafood is not really the appropriate term just to describe fish, salmon, shrimp, just lots of different sea animals. So these terms, we argue, are actually just more precise, and they don't go for the bias of industry and status quo use of animals. It allows us to actually think about them more on their own terms. Okay, so I had written a paper with Mark Beckhoff and Sarah Bexell, who are biologists, about how journalists can incorporate non-human animal voice in news stories. So like other animals could be seen as sources of news. But of course, this isn't like this ridiculous scenario I have here by putting, you don't ask a question of a hawk or an owl. So you don't do it that way. But we can find other ways of adapting journalism to allow for animal communication or humans to speak on behalf of other animals. So part of avoiding humanist bias is allowing animals to speak for themselves by audio-visual media. So we can see, now these are still shots I'm using here, so I'm not following my example right now. So this would be better if what we were looking at were video pictures. So you could see, you could hear the seal screaming for her life from this Canadian sealer. Or you can hear the sound of a mother, I think that's a coyote, with her baby. So let's hear them actually expressing themselves. Let's see their behaviors. And it's harder in print journalism because we have to translate and write everything. But of course, with an online component, you can add that video that gives the animals a chance to do their species specific communication. And there's times when reporters, I think it's perfectly fine for them to interpret other species' basic communications if they seem self evident. Like here we have some cubs and they're playing, so they seem to be joyful and playing. Here's another example of like a foie gras industry. So these are either ducks or geese, and they are being force fed by probably a minimum wage employee who is feeding them lots of grain because foie gras is really the enlarged livers. So, one thing I think it would be fair for the journalists to notice is that this is one of the only times we see animals not being happy it's dinner time. Like the rest of us, me included, are super into feeding time. So this, I think it's fair for the journalist to say they are scared of the employee who works for the foie gras industry because they don't like having a pipe shoved down their neck so that people could eat their liver for a luxury item. I think that's fair to say. Now, sometimes certain communication from other animals is a little more nuanced and we may misinterpret it. Like a lot of times with dolphins and whales, we might think they're smiling, or sometimes with dogs when they're panting. Let's see. My dog's relaxed now that my neighbors have stopped bothering us. We'll misinterpret them and think, oh, they're smiling, when actually they're nervous, or dolphins seem to have what we see as a natural smile. Or like a collapsed dorsal fin is something that we see a lot in orcas in captivity, but then it's not natural. It's not something you see in the wild, and it's actually an indication they're really not thriving. So again, most of us don't know enough about, we're not cetacean experts, so we don't know enough about it. But you can ask biologists, ethologists, or other animal advocates to read certain situations and to tell us more about how an animal is doing, like in captivity, especially. Like here's Mark Bekoff, a rather famous biologist who speaks out all of the time on behalf of other animals. He's also vegan. So that's another example of a way you could bring someone in who doesn't, like if you're talking about pigs, Dr. Bekoff is not going to have a vested interest in eating pigs. In fact, he kind of champions them, but not, to do it for money. So that's another way to bring in a source to the news of someone to speak on behalf of animals. And again, we have that expert list that's on animalsandmedia.org website. Now, I did my master's thesis years ago on farmed animals in the news. So this is an older example back when there was mad cow disease risk. But in terms of covering animal activists and these issues, you want to balance industry and government sources with animal activist sources. So, and like, don't just wait until there's a protest or something to make it to involve animal advocates. Because a lot of times when there's a mass killing of animals because of a pandemic of some kind, because so many of our zoonotic diseases obviously originate in other animals. And so whether it's, swine flu, bird flu, mad cow, foot and mouth disease, let's not just have government experts and industry experts talk, but let's hear from veterinarians and animal lawyers and biologists and other people as well. Like this particular New York Times article too was an example of it's focusing on animals as human food and profit sources. And it's calling mad cow disease a completely economic plague because it doesn't affect well, this one is talking actually about foot and mouth disease is a completely economic plague, unlike mad cow disease. And so they're calling it a killer economy. So the whole article, even though the picture is a really poignant picture of an animal in an industrialized captivity setting, it appears to be a sheep here. All we see as a caption is foot and mouth disease endangers the profitability of livestock. So that is how I am told to read this image. I'm not supposed to think about the fact that she's going to be killed or whether she deserves to be there or not. I'm only told that I should feel bad that she's not going to be profitable as living stock for somebody. So want to point out that's a limited way to talk about these other animals. Also, in covering animal activists, there is a range of different types of activism. So it's good just with any, whether it's the Black Lives Matter movement, environmental movement, women's rights, animal rights, you want to cover a vast spectrum of different types of activism and not just things that are considered kind of more radical or maybe even amusing. So you can see some examples here, like here's an animals equality protest, and it is a much more radical or provocative thing to do, where they literally hold deceased animals and have like a vigil for them out in public. But here's Mi-Yoon Park, who used to work for Compassion Over Killing and Humane Society of the United States. She did a rescue of an egg-laying hen, a hen used for her eggs, and just to show the conditions that the animals are in. And then, oh wait, who's this? This is me at my radio station volunteer job, where I have an animal and environmental show. So these are just lots of different ways that you can focus more on substance over spectacle and make sure that people who advocate for other animals are not just seen as weirdos. In selecting visuals, you should be willing to air undercover footage of exploitation for public debate and to obtain footage to verify and expose routine treatment and living conditions of captive animals. So again, here we have the U.S. egg industry and open rescue by Compassion Over Killing, which now goes by Animal Outlook. That's a nonprofit group. And then here's some undercover footage from the documentary called The Witness. And this is an example of a fox being anally electrocuted by a fur farm employee so as not to damage her pelt. So these are things that are legally going on. This mistreatment is legal. So we should see it. If it's legal, we should see it. But there's a lot of ag-gag laws, or just in general, a lot of secrecy from the industry, who knows what they're doing is rather disgusting to see, and there's really no way they can showcase some notion of animal welfare when you're mass producing animals. It's naturally going to be rather abusive, and there's going to be a lot of suffering. So let's go ahead and see that. And if you've asked to have access to the facility and you can't have it, then that needs to be part of the story, or you need to press a little bit more to get access, because I think we deserve to see how these facilities are treating these animals. But also, of course, we are going to see a lot of negative images of the way we treat animals. And so here's an example of traps, which are all over the United States, that you or I could step in, or in this case, this is a coyote perhaps, or a wolf. But okay, there's also times when we are also wanting to show them just in their habitat. So here's California coyote, and they're looks like they're hunting there. So it's good to also show them just as adults in their own environment, out in their communities, living their lives, and not always be kind of at the mercy of us or just shown as captive animals. We should see them, you should aim to get more footage of them in their natural environments. All right, so those are the main guidelines that we have for journalists on the animalsandmedia.org website. And if you click on the entertainment media guidelines, here is a summary of some of the things that we're going to be talking about there. So for TV producers or film producers, for example, diversify programming to ensure more programming represents the perspectives of animal liberation and animal welfare. So just there's many opportunities to bring that into the discussion, or make that the outlook, or have the characters represent that. add more biocentric or life-centered or ecocentric, system-centered perspectives. So that's countering more of the anthropocentric, human-centered perspective that we tend to take, even though we know, yes, humans are the ones that we're producing the shows for, but still, it's really creative, I think, to open it up and say, what if the perspective we were taking was just not human and it was life-centered? So all life mattered in this perspective. Or we're thinking in terms of kind of ecosystem health and not just individual human health. Include non-human animals' stories, represent them as individuals with their own self-interest. So don't just represent them in human terms. And so this is similar to what we talked about in the journalism area. So don't just talk about them as a pest to us or food or research subject for us. Acknowledge that they have free will, they make unique decisions. So even within species, you're going to have individuals. And I certainly think we see this with our companion animals, a lot of different personality traits, and people who run different sanctuaries will tell you that too, that among the cows or the pigs or the turkeys or the lions or whoever is at the sanctuary, they have a lot of kind of unique aspects of their personality. So, here's some examples of some sanctuaries, some wild animals. This was another sanctuary where unfortunately this was the matriarch. She was the matriarch of this sanctuary, and then she passed away. So they were trying to show her friends at the sanctuary that she had passed away. And the reporter, I think this was National Geographic, was noting it was so silent, which in chimp culture is very rare. So that was also showing kind of the gravity of how her extended family and friends there at the sanctuary were recognizing this situation. And there's a story to tell about that particular captive chimpanzee and her life and then ending up at the sanctuary and all that. So there's so many interesting stories that go beyond just the stories of we humans. And another way to think about other animals is that they have cultures, as particularly social animals. So when we want to be into multicultural programming, we can also be thinking about the fact that we can showcase a lemur culture or wolf culture or fish culture. There's lots of different ways to showcase culture, and then there's other animals have that as well. And we want to be selective in portraying wildlife so as not to overrepresent predator-prey conflicts for dramatic purposes. Because again, that's natural, especially in wildlife documentaries, is to hyper focus on the predator-prey relationship. And yes, that is part of wild or free roaming wild animals' lives. But I think it gets overrepresented for dramatic purposes. And there's lots of ways that we could spend more time on the more cooperative and symbiotic aspects of the relationships between wild species and within their family. And certainly like these kinds of movies that are, this was The Shallows, that are emphasizing, man eating sharks and stuff, really miss the point in the fact that we're the ones doing most of the killing of sharks and sea creatures. So, and we already have a fear of sharks, and maybe it's a little bit of a healthy fear so long as, we don't murder them. But anyway, that's amped up for dramatic effect, but it has a real life effect on the way people treat sharks in the real world. Recognize that programming featuring non-human animals currently tends to overrepresent charismatic megafauna, like mammals and birds, like elephants or whales or things like that, because they're considered the most attractive and appealing to humans. And we are mammals, so I think we like other mammals. But for accuracy and biodiversity, creators should make an effort to also showcase and introduce audiences to other types of animal species, such as fish, amphibians, reptiles, insects, and invertebrates, because they make up most of the species in the world, especially invertebrates and insects. So let's actually talk about them more, because it's almost, we get the impression sometimes who we see in the media, there's more of those individuals, whether that's a human race or gender or a certain kind of human type, or other animal species too. And it also might indicate that they are plentiful. So that's another issue too. If you over represent endangered species, that we almost get the impression that they are not endangered, that they're kind of abundant. So let's try to show a variety of different species, even ones that we on the surface don't seem to have a lot in common with us. Remind viewers that we too are animals and we share many of the same traits. And I like to I like to say that I'm an animal and talk about other animals by using the term other and not just say humans and animals. And while anthropomorphism of animals, especially in children's programming, can be useful in bringing audiences closer to other animals and recognizing non-human animals as persons who have emotions similar to non-human animals, or similar to human animals, I should say, it can risk misrepresenting other animal species and creating unrealistic expectations for how real animals should behave, especially to be attractive to humans. So it's kind of a catch-22. We didn't want to say, oh, you should never anthropomorphize, because that kind of denies the fact that there's a lot of similarity between humans and other animals and that we've co-evolved and that we've all come out of the ocean. And so it's not unrealistic to say that they have feelings that also we can empathize with. But we have to make sure we're not just portraying them kind of as humans. And so whether we have to ask whether it's really productive, the anthropomorphizing. Like, for example, Dory was really popular in the Finding Nemo movies because we all love Ellen DeGeneres and she's really hilarious. But if you end up saying, like a lot of people did, ooh, I want to go get a blue tang exotic fish, you're probably going to be disappointed because while he's beautiful, he's no Ellen. And so he's, they may not, I don't know for sure, but I don't know that they have much of a sense of humor. So I think that we're kind of setting other animals up for failure of sorts if we misrepresent kind of what they're really like just to make them more appealing to us. So that's something to think about so we can appreciate them on their own terms. And I think this is one of my last slides. Consider the behavior and values of human characters portrayed on screen to determine what messages they convey about the human capacity for kindness, social justice, and ecological responsibility. So there's always a chance, I think, in most movies or documentaries to make sure we're featuring people who we can admire, who are role models. They don't have to be perfect in every way, but we need to see altruism and kindness and people following all of these kinds of more healthy and pro-social behaviors like we see here. People living simply, people recycling, having a low carbon footprint, living animal-friendly vegan lives and lifestyles, choosing to have a small family or adopt children, adopting or rescuing companion animals like my dog Elliot over there. Engage in volunteerism and civic actions. We're showing people voting and getting out there and making a difference in their communities, running for office, demonstrating compassion and nonviolence toward all living beings. So we don't want racist and sexist and homophobic portrayals, nor do we want speciesist portrayals where people just dismiss other animals and discriminate against them because they're not human. So I wish like everyone could be like Lisa Simpson here. And thanks to Abu and Linda and Paul McCartney years ago, they got Lisa to go vegetarian, and she, although a know-it-all, is a really positive representation in terms of being this really engaged, smart person who really cares about others, in contrast to Homer and her brother. Obviously for comedic effect, but still I think it works in terms of reminding us of things we should do and we should want to do. So this is my last slide. I just want to let you know that we have a Facebook page where Deb Merskin and I are constantly posting examples from the media that usually are positive examples, but sometimes they're negative examples, and we give constructive criticism so you could see our guidelines in action. Again, you can see them at animalsandmedia.org. And I encourage you to use them and communicate with us and share them with media makers that you know so that people can discuss them and maybe start putting them into practice. And hopefully it will improve and transform our relationships between our species and many other animals and the natural world. So thank you for listening to this, and hopefully you'll check out animalsandmedia.org. Bye.